Do you know the feeling of being framed in a gilded cage? The moment they laughed at my father's old shoes, I realized this was not a wedding. It was a trial. I heard the verdict they intended for my family right before my dad quietly slipped a small key into my hand. He told me if I wanted the truth, I would have it tonight. They never expected the poor old man was actually worth over $1 billion. My name is Ava Turner, and standing in the center of the Marrow Ridge Grand Ballroom felt less like a celebration and more like a surgical theater where I was the patient under the lights. I am 32 years old, and in my line of work as an emergency room coordinator in Savannah, I am used to high-pressure environments. I am used to the metallic smell of blood, the frantic shouting of trauma surgeons, and the piercing beep of heart monitors. I can handle chaos. I can handle life and death. But this world, this crystalline, suffocating world of the Wexford family was a different kind of trauma entirely. The air in the ballroom did not smell like food or flowers. It smelled of old money and cold ambition. The lighting was designed to flatter diamonds and expose flaws, casting a golden hue over 500 guests who were not here for a wedding. They were here for a merger. I smoothed the silk of my dress with damp palms. Beside me, Ethan Wexford looked like he had been born in a tuxedo. He was the golden son of Charlotte, the heir to the Wexford Meridian real estate empire, and the man I thought I knew. He was smiling that practiced, camera-ready smile, shaking hands with state senators and venture capitalists whose names I had only seen in the business section of the newspaper. This was not a wedding. It was a networking event with a cake. I scanned the room, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The sheer scale of the Marrow Ridge Grand was designed to make a person feel small. The ceilings were 30 feet high, draped in chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. The tables were set with silverware that probably cost more than my car, and the noise, it was a dull, constant roar of polite laughter and deal-making. I was looking for the only person who mattered. Then I saw him. The side door near the service entrance creaked open. Just a sliver. My father, Roy Turner, stepped inside. He hesitated. At 64 years old, my dad had spent his life working with his hands, moving boxes, driving trucks, and fixing things that other people broke. He did not belong in a place like the Marrow Ridge Grand, and he knew it. He stood near the emergency exit sign, its red glow casting a harsh light on his shoulder. He was wearing his best suit. It was a charcoal gray ensemble he had bought 10 years ago for a funeral. The fabric had grown shiny at the elbows, and the cut was boxy, swallowing his thinning frame. He held his hands clasped in front of him, clutching a small, worn fedora as if it were a shield. He looked terrified. I felt a surge of love so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. I took a step toward him, ready to abandon the receiving line and drag him to the front row where he belonged. But Daphne Wexford got there first. My future mother-in-law moved through the crowd like a shark gliding through reef water. She was 60, though her face claimed 40, and she was draped in a silver gown that hissed softly as she walked. She stopped 3 feet away from my father, maintaining a sanitary distance. I was close enough to hear her, though I doubt she cared if I did. She tilted her head, a smile fixed on her face that did not reach her eyes. It was the smile a realtor gives when showing a house that needs to be demolished. "Mr. Turner," Daphne said. Her voice was light, airy, and sharp as a scalpel. "You found the service entrance. How resourceful." My dad smiled, a genuine, crinkling smile that showed the lines around his eyes. He did not hear the insult. He never did. He only heard a greeting. "Good evening, Mrs. Wexford," he said. His voice was rough, gravelly from decades of silence and hard work. I didn't want to get in the way of the main doors. It looked busy. "Oh, it is," Daphne said. She gestured vaguely at his suit. "And look at you. You are just so rustically charming. It really adds a touch of authenticity to the evening, like a prop from a simpler time." I felt my stomach drop. I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to step in, to defend the man who raised me. Ethan was checking his watch, then Blake Wexford, Ethan's younger sister, drifted over. Blake was 24, beautiful in a way that required a team of stylists, and bored. She held a flute of champagne loosely in one hand. She looked my father up and down, her eyes stopping at his feet. My dad was wearing his leather dress shoes. They were polished. I knew they were polished because I had watched him spend 2 hours buffing them at the kitchen table last night, but polish could not hide the deep creases in the leather or the fact that the heels were worn down on the outside edge. They were working man's shoes. Forced into formal service, Blake let out a short, musical laugh. It was not loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom, it carried. "Oh my God, Mom," Blake said, loud enough for the circle of investors nearby to hear. "Look at those shoes. Did he walk here from Georgia?" The laughter rippled outward. It was not a raucous belly laugh. It was worse. It was a polite, tittering chuckle, the sound of people who are so secure in their superiority that they find poverty amusing. My father looked down at his feet. He shifted his weight, trying to hide the scuffs on his left shoe behind his right ankle. His face flushed a deep, painful red. He did not say a word. He just stood there, holding his hat, while the people my husband called family treated him like a court jester. Something inside me snapped. The carefully curated composure I had maintained for months, the silence I had kept to please the Wexfords, the nod and smile routine, it all shattered. I turned to Ethan. "I'm going to get him." I started to move, but Ethan's hand shot out. He grabbed my forearm. It was not a caress. It was a restraint. His fingers dug into the soft flesh of my arm, hard enough to bruise. He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the crowd, smiling that perfect politician smile. "Ava, stop," he whispered through his teeth. "Do not make a scene." I stared at him, shocked. "They are mocking him. Ethan, that is my father." "They are just joking," Ethan hissed, his grip tightening. "Blake has had too much champagne. If you go over there and make a dramatic production out of it, you will embarrass my mother. She hates losing face. Just stay here. Smile." "He is standing by the exit like a servant," I said, my voice trembling. "I am going to bring him to the family table." "He is fine where he is," Ethan said, and for the first time, his voice lost its smooth veneer. It was cold, absolute. "He does not fit at the head table. Ava, look at him. He sticks out. Just let him stay in the back. It is better for everyone." I looked at my fiancé, really looked at him, in the harsh light of the chandelier. The lines of his handsome face looked sharp, predatory. I realized then that the prenup, the etiquette lessons, the comments about my hair, they were not suggestions. They were renovations. He was not marrying me. He was acquiring me, and he intended to strip the property of its original features. My father was an original feature. I pulled against Ethan's grip, but before I could break free, my dad looked up. He saw me. He saw Ethan's hand clamped on my arm. He saw the tears stinging the corners of my eyes. He saw the panic rising in my chest, and he did what he had always done. He protected me. He locked eyes with me across the ballroom floor. He stood up a little straighter. He offered me a small, gentle nod. He mouthed the words, clear as day, "No, stay." Then he smiled a brave, heartbreaking smile that said, "I am okay. Do not worry about me. Be happy." He accepted the humiliation. He swallowed it whole, right there in front of 500 strangers, just so I would not have to fight on my wedding day. He let them laugh at his shoes, so I could keep my peace. The breath left my lungs in a ragged gasp. I felt like I had been punched. The cruelty of the Wexfords was ugly. Yes. But my father's submission, his willingness to be their punchline to save me, was a pain so sharp I could physically feel it in my chest. I stopped pulling. I went limp in Ethan's grip. Ethan, sensing the fight go out of me, relaxed his hand and patted my arm condescendingly. "Good girl," he whispered. "See, no harm done." I stood there, frozen, watching my father retreat further into the shadows near the kitchen doors. He found a spot behind a large potted fern. effectively erasing himself from the view of the high society guests. But he was not entirely invisible. Near the buffet, a man was watching him. This man was distinct from the other guests. He had salt and pepper hair cut in a severe military style and wore a simple black suit. On his lapel was a small, understated pin, a silver triangle inside a circle. It was the insignia of the Global Sovereign Finance Summit, a gathering so exclusive that even the Wexfords had to beg for invites. The man was holding a glass of scotch, but he was not drinking it. He was staring at Roy Turner. He was not laughing. He was not sneering. He was squinting, his head tilted to the side, studying my father with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was the look of a man trying to place a face he had not seen in a very long time. He took a step forward, then stopped. He looked at the Wexford family, laughing in their circle of light. Then he looked back at the man in the old suit standing by the kitchen door. The man with the silver hair slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He did not take a picture. He made a call. I watched him mouth a few words, his eyes never leaving my father. I could not hear what he said, but I saw the expression on his face change. It went from curiosity to shock, and then, finally, to a terrified sort of respect. Ethan pulled me back toward the guests. "Come on," he said. "Senator Thorne wants to say hello." I turned my back on my father, my heart cold as a stone in my chest. The ballroom glittered around me, a beautiful, shining trap. I knew, with a sudden, crystal clarity, that this night was not going to end with a toast. It was going to end with a reckoning. I just did not know yet who would be paying the price. The man holding my arm in the ballroom was a stranger to me, but the tragedy was that I had watched him die slowly over the last 2 years. The Ethan Wexford I met in Savannah was not a prince of industry. He was a resident physician doing a rotation at my hospital, wearing wrinkled scrubs and carrying a coffee cup that had seen better days. He drove a dented sedan that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. And he never talked about money. In fact, he seemed to have a disdain for it. I remember our third date vividly. We were sitting on a plastic bench outside a taco truck at 2 a.m, exhausted from a 12-hour shift. He had mustard on his chin. He was laughing about a mistake he had made in a suture lab, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He told me he wanted to heal people because it was the only thing that felt real. He told me he loved that I worked in the ER because I saw humanity in the raw, without filters. I fell in love with that man. I fell in love with the Ethan who preferred dive bars to country clubs, the one who listened to my dad tell long, rambling stories about vintage carburetors with genuine interest. I fell in love with the illusion of a man who was escaping his orbit. I did not know then that gravity always wins. The shift happened 6 months into our relationship, the moment he decided it was time for me to meet the family. He did not say parents. He always said the family, as if they were a corporate entity rather than people. The drive to Charlotte felt like crossing a border into a hostile nation. The Wexford estate was behind iron gates that were taller than my house. As we pulled up the winding driveway, lined with manicured oaks that looked like soldiers standing at attention, Ethan changed. He sat up straighter. He checked his hair in the rearview mirror 3 times. The easygoing doctor vanished, replaced by a nervous air. Dinner that night was my first deposition. We sat at a dining table long enough to land a plane on. Daphne Wexford sat at one end, Graham at the other, with Ethan and me stranded in the middle. The silence was heavy, broken only by the scrape of silver on china. "So, Ava," Graham said, not looking up from his steak. "Ethan tells us you work in administration." "I am an ER coordinator," I corrected gently. "I manage patient flow and trauma triage." "Triage," Daphne said, testing the word like it was a piece of gristle. "That must be very visceral. Do you have a degree for that?" "I have a master's in healthcare administration," I said, feeling the need to justify my existence. "State school, I assume?" she asked. It was not a question. It was a categorization. "University of Georgia," I said. "Charming," she said, taking a sip of wine. We have always supported the local workforce. The entire night went that way. They did not ask about my childhood, my dreams, or what I loved about their son. They asked about my father's tax bracket, though they phrased it as inquiries about his investments. When I told them my dad was retired from logistics, a polite way of saying he was a trucker who eventually managed a small fleet, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Ethan did not defend me. He just ate his steak. Eyes downcast, nodding along when his father lectured us on the importance of legacy. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at my apartment. It was wrapped in silver paper with a silk ribbon. Inside was a leather-bound book titled The Art of Grace Etiquette for the Modern Society Hostess. There was a note attached on thick, cream-colored cardstock. Dear Ava, just a little something to help you prepare for the life ahead. We want you to feel comfortable. Love, Daphne. I called Ethan. Furious. She sent me a manual on how to behave. She thinks I'm trash. Ethan, you are overreacting, Ethan said, his voice sounding tired. She is just trying to help. Ava, the social circles in Charlotte are different. There are rules. She just wants you to fit in. Do it for me. Do it for me. That became the mantra of our engagement. Slowly, the criticisms began to seep into our daily life. Ethan stopped wearing his scrubs home. He started buying Italian suits. He suggested I dye my hair a shade lighter because blonde reads softer on camera. When I laughed too loud at a movie, he would touch my knee and give me a sharp look, whispering that I was being shrill. He was editing me. And like a fool, I let him, because I thought it was the price of admission to his heart. The worst moment came when my father finally met them. It was 3 months before the wedding. We met for lunch at a bistro in Atlanta, a halfway point. My dad wore a clean polo shirt and khakis. He was nervous. He wanted to make a good impression. When we sat down, Dad reached out to shake Graham's hand. Graham looked at the calluses on my father's palm for a fraction of a second too long before gripping it loosely. Roy, is it? Graham asked. Ethan tells us you drove trucks. I did, Dad said, his voice steady. Covered 48 states in 30 years. Seen more of this country than most. Fascinating, Daphne said, looking out the window. I suppose someone has to move the goods around. My dad tried to engage them. He asked about their real estate projects, showing a surprising amount of knowledge about zoning laws. Graham cut him off with a wave of his hand. It is a bit complex to explain. Roy, Graham said, let's just say we build the skyline, and we let others worry about the deliveries. My dad went quiet. He shrank. He focused on his water glass. When the bill came, Dad reached for his wallet. I've got this, he said. Graham laughed. It was a dry barking sound. Put your money away. Roy, the appetizer costs more than your weekly pension. Let the big boys handle this. I waited for Ethan to speak. I waited for him to say, have some respect, Dad. Instead, Ethan laughed, a nervous, sycophantic chuckle. Thanks, Dad, he said to Graham. In the car afterward, I exploded, but Ethan turned it back on me. My dad is just abrasive. Ava, he is under a lot of pressure, and honestly, your dad was trying too hard. It was awkward. That was when the we died. It was no longer Ethan and Ava against the world. It was Ethan and the Wexfords against my lack of pedigree. Then came the prenuptial agreement. It was not handed to me by Ethan. It was presented to me in a conference room by 3 lawyers who cost more per hour than I made in a week. The document was an inch thick. I expected the financial clauses. I knew they wanted to protect the family money. I did not care about their millions. But as I read through the text, I felt a cold chill settle in my bones. Clause 14, Section B. The spouse agrees to submit all public appearances, social media posts, and press interactions for approval by the Wexford Family Public Relations Trust. Clause 18, Section A. In the event of separation, the spouse agrees to a lifetime non-disclosure agreement regarding all internal family matters, under penalty of immediate financial ruin. They were not protecting their assets. They were buying my silence. They were purchasing a prop for their family photos. "Ethan," I said, sliding the paper across the mahogany table. "I cannot sign this. This says I can't even post a picture of our dog without your mother's permission." Ethan took my hand. His palms were soft now. The calluses from the gym were gone, replaced by the smoothness of lotion. "It is standard, baby," he said, using the voice he used for difficult patients. "It is just legal boilerplate. We are a high-profile family. We have investors to protect. It does not mean anything for us. Once we are married, everything will be fine. Trust me. Trust me." I looked at him, and I saw the fear in his eyes. He was terrified of his father. He was terrified of losing his inheritance, and he needed me, the respectable, clean-cut project wife, to secure his position. I signed it. I signed it because I had convinced myself that beneath the Italian suit, the boy who ate tacos in the rain still existed. The night before the wedding, my father came to my hotel room. The Merrill Ridge Grand was buzzing with activity, but my room was quiet. Dad sat on the edge of the bed, holding his hat. He looked tired. The last few months of subtle insults from the Wexfords had aged him, but his eyes were clear. "Ava," he said softly. "Yeah, Dad. I know you love him," he said. He did not say he liked Ethan. He was too honest for that. "But I need you to hear me." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You can compromise on a lot of things in a marriage," he said. "You can compromise on where to live, what to eat, how to spend your Sundays, but you cannot compromise on who you are." He reached out and took my hand. His grip was rough, warm, and solid. "Don't trade your self-respect to buy their acceptance, honey," he said. "It is too high a price, and the thing about people like them is that once you pay it, they just raise the price tomorrow." I squeezed his hand, holding back tears. "It will be okay. Dad, Ethan loves me." Dad looked at me for a long moment, a sadness in his eyes that I did not understand then. "I hope so," he said. "But if he doesn't, if you find yourself alone in that crowd tomorrow, just remember that you are a Turner, and we don't break." He stood up to leave, pausing at the door. "I have a gift for you tomorrow," he said. "Just a small thing, but keep it close." I thought he meant a necklace or a card. I did not know he was handing me a weapon. Now, standing in the ballroom, watching him endure the mockery of the people I had just legally bound myself to, his words echoed in my skull like a gunshot. "Don't trade your self-respect." I looked at Ethan, who was laughing at something a senator said, completely ignoring the fact that his wife was trembling. I realized then that I had already paid the deposit on my soul, but the final payment was due tonight, and I wasn't sure I had enough currency left to cover it. The transition from the cocktail hour to the dinner reception was a choreographed migration of wealth. As the heavy mahogany doors to the grand ballroom swung fully open, ushering the 500 guests toward their assigned seats, the true geography of the evening revealed itself. I had spent months agonizing over the seating chart. I had placed my father at table 2, right next to the head table where Ethan and I would sit. It was a place of honor, flanking the couple, exactly where the father of the bride was supposed to be. I had confirmed it with the wedding planner, a woman named Celine who carried a clipboard like a weapon, 3 separate times. But as I walked into the room, my arm linked with Ethan's, I saw that the landscape had changed. Table 2 was filled with partners from Wexford Meridian and their wives. I scanned the room, panic rising in my throat like bile. Table 3, no. Table 4, no. I finally found him. My father was seated at table 42. It was the very last table in the room, tucked into the far back corner, directly next to the swinging metal doors of the service kitchen. Every time a waiter burst out with a tray of filet mignon, a gust of stale air and the clatter of dishwashing hit the table. He was sitting with the overflow guests, distant cousins of the Wexfords who were only invited out of obligation, and the photographer's assistant. "Ethan," I whispered, tightening my grip on his bicep, "why is my dad at table 42? I put him at table 2. Ethan didn't break his stride or his smile. He waved to a county judge. Mom made a few last-minute adjustments. The logistics were tricky with the governor's unexpected RSVP. She thought your dad would be more comfortable back there. You know, less pressure to make conversation with the heavy hitters. Comfortable? I hissed. He is next to the trash cans. Ethan? He is fine. Ava, look at him. He is eating a bread roll. Stop looking for problems. I looked back. Dad was indeed sitting quietly, his posture upright, his hands folded on the table. But as I watched, he reached for the place card above his charger plate. I saw him squint at it. I knew, with a sinking certainty, what I would find before I even got there later. They hadn't just moved him, they had erased him. When I managed to slip away during the salad course to check on him, I saw the card. It didn't say Roy Turner, father of the bride. It simply said, guest. They couldn't even grant him his name. I barely had time to touch my father's shoulder before a sharp voice cut through the air. Excuse me, you must be the father. I turned to see Aunt Miriam, a woman encased in floral taffeta who was Graham Wexford's older sister. She was holding a glass of Chardonnay and looking at my father with the curiosity one might reserve for a zoo animal. Dad stood up immediately, wiping his mouth with his napkin. Yes, ma'am, Roy Turner. He extended his hand. Miriam didn't take it. She just stared at his suit, her eyes lingering on the fraying cuffs. I was just wondering, Miriam said, her voice loud enough to silence the chatter at the nearby tables. What is it exactly that you do, Mr. Turner? To contribute to an event of this magnitude, the air went still. The servers froze. I am retired, ma'am, Dad said softly. Retired, she echoed, letting the word hang there. Well, it is a lovely party. I suppose it is a luxury to enjoy such a lavish evening without the burden of having paid for any of it. My brother Graham is a saint, really, financing the entire affair so the bride's side doesn't feel inadequate. My face burned hot. I opened my mouth to snap that I had offered to pay for the flowers and the band, that my savings were in this wedding too. But the microphone screeched on the main stage. Daphne Wexford was tapping a crystal glass with a silver spoon. I had to rush back to the head table, leaving my father standing there under Miriam's judgmental gaze. Welcome, everyone, Daphne purred into the mic. She looked radiant and terrifying. Graham and I are so delighted to host you all tonight at the Marrow Ridge Grand. We wanted to give our son Ethan and his beautiful bride, Ava, a start in life that befits the Wexford name. She paused for applause. It came, thunderous and obedient. We know that young love often needs a steady foundation, she continued, her eyes drifting toward the back of the room, locking onto table 42. And we were more than happy to shoulder the full financial weight of this celebration. We know that Ava's family is delightfully simple. We wanted to spare them the stress of trying to keep up. So please, eat, drink, and enjoy the generosity of the Wexford family tonight. It was a masterclass in humiliation. She had framed her insult as charity. To the room, she sounded benevolent. To me, and to my father, she had just announced that we were charity cases who should be grateful for the scraps from their table. I sat down, my legs trembling. I reached for my water glass, my hand shaking. Did you hear what she said? I whispered to Ethan. Ethan was busy cutting his steak. It was a nice speech, Ava. She gave you guys an out. She took the pressure off. Why are you always looking for a fight? I looked at the guests. I could hear the whispers now. They rippled through the room like a snake moving through grass. She is so lucky. A Cinderella story. Really, dragged out of the trailer park. I heard she has 0 assets. He didn't even want a prenup, but the parents forced it. Look at the dad. Poor thing. He looks like he's waiting for a bus. I felt like I was suffocating. The crystals, the silk, the gourmet food, it all felt like a costume I was trapped in. Then came the moment that nearly broke me. It was during the intermezzo. My father had stood up to stretch his legs. He was standing near a pillar, well out of the way of the servers. Blake Wexford, Ethan's sister, was walking by with a group of her friends' young socialites who treated life like a reality show they were starring in. Blake was holding a large glass of Cabernet. As she passed my father, she didn't stumble. She didn't trip. I was watching her. She looked right at him, smiled a tight, cruel little smile, and flicked her wrist. The dark red liquid splashed across the front of my father's gray suit. It soaked into the cheap fabric instantly, creating a dark, spreading stain that looked like a gunshot wound. "Oh," Blake gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in a performance of shock that wouldn't have convinced a toddler. "Oh my God, I am so clumsy." Her friends giggled. It was a wet, nasty sound. My father looked down at his chest. He didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He just reached into his pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, a plain white cotton square, and began to dab at the stain. "It is okay," he said quietly. "It happens." "I am so sorry," Blake said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I hope that wasn't your only suit. But then again, a suit like that, it is probably used to a little dirt, right? It probably feels right at home being stained." The table nearest to them erupted in laughter. My father stopped dabbing. He looked at Blake. For a second, just a second, I saw something flash in his eyes that I had never seen before. It wasn't sadness. It was the cold, hard steel of a man who had backed down 1,000 times and had decided he was done backing down. But then the mask slid back into place. "Don't worry about it, miss," he said. "It will wash out." I stood up so fast my chair fell over backward with a crash. The room went silent for a heartbeat, then resumed its chatter. I grabbed Ethan by the lapels of his tuxedo and dragged him toward the side exit, away from the tables. "Ava, what the hell?" he snapped, pulling his jacket free. "People are watching." "Did you see that?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. "Blake just threw wine on him, on purpose, and then she called him dirty." Ethan sighed, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling. "Ava, you are hysterical. It was an accident. Blake is clumsy, and she was making a joke to break the tension. You need to stop being so sensitive. You are embarrassing yourself." "I am embarrassing myself." I stared at him. "My father is standing there with wine on his chest, being laughed at by your sister's friends, and you think I am the problem." "He is a grown man, Ava," Ethan said cold. "He can handle a little spill, honestly. The suit was a disaster anyway. Maybe now he will have an excuse to buy one that actually fits. Stop making a scene. My mother is watching." He turned and walked back into the party, adjusting his cufflinks. I stood there in the shadows of the hallway, tears hot and stinging in my eyes. I looked back at the ballroom. My father was still standing by the pillar. He had stopped trying to clean the stain. He was just standing there, one hand in his pocket, watching the room with a strange, detached calm. Near the bar, the man with the salt and pepper hair, the one with the finance pin, was back. He wasn't looking at the bride or the groom. He was looking at Roy Turner. He leaned in and whispered something to a young assistant standing next to him. The assistant's eyes went wide. "Are you sure?" the assistant asked, his voice carrying over the low hum of the music. 100%, the man said. "I never forget a face that changed the market. Is he here? Really?" The man pulled out his phone again, typing furiously. He looked at my father with a mixture of confusion and awe. He looked like a man who had just discovered a tiger disguised as a house cat. I didn't have time to process what that meant, because the photographer was calling for the family portraits. "Family only. Immediate family," the photographer shouted, waving us toward the grand staircase. We lined up. The Wexfords took the center. Of course, Graham and Daphne stood on the step above us, radiating power. Blake and her other brothers stood on the sides. Ethan and I were in the middle. "And the bride's father?" the photographer asked, looking around. "Here," my dad said. He stepped forward. "Great," the photographer said. He looked at the composition. He looked at the Wexford family in their shimmering silk and bespoke wool. Then he looked at my dad in his wine-stained, baggy gray suit. Actually," the photographer said, glancing at Daphne, who gave a subtle nod. "Sir, why don't you stand down there on the landing, just to balance the shot?" It was a demotion. They were putting him on the floor while they stood on the pedestal. My dad didn't argue. He walked to the spot they pointed at. It was 2 feet lower than everyone else. I started to move toward him. "No, I want him next to me." "Stay put, Ava," Ethan hissed through his teeth, smiling for the camera. "We are losing the light." I looked down at my father. He looked up at me. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at the Wexford family towering above him. He looked at Daphne's smug satisfaction. He looked at Graham's arrogant tilt of the chin. He looked at Ethan's hand gripping my waist like property, and in that moment, as the flashbulbs popped, blinding and white, I realized my father wasn't standing lower because he was ashamed. He was standing lower because he was getting a better angle. He was observing them. He was cataloging every insult, every sneer, every moment of disrespect. The look on his face was terrifyingly blank. It was the face of a man who was no longer a guest. He was a witness. And as the shutter clicked, capturing the image of my family's humiliation for eternity, I saw his hand drift to his tie clip, the gift he had given me earlier. He tapped it once, just once, and I knew. The trial was over. The verdict was in. The sentencing was about to begin. To understand the terrifying composure in my father's eyes as he stood on that lower step. You have to understand what happened 45 minutes before the organist played the first note of the processional. I was in the bridal suite, a room that cost more for one night than my father's truck had cost when it was new. It was a cavern of cream-colored silk and floor-to-ceiling mirrors, designed to make a bride feel like a princess, or perhaps a prize poodle being groomed for a show. The air was thick with the smell of expensive hairspray and white lilies. I was alone for the first time all day. My bridesmaids had gone out to the hallway to field a frantic call from the florist about the shade of the hydrangeas. I was staring at myself in the mirror, trying to recognize the woman in the reflection. The dress was a Wexford choice, a structural, architectural gown that felt less like clothing and more like a marble casing. There was a soft knock at the door, not the frantic rapping of the wedding planner, but a hesitant, gentle sound. "Come in," I said. My father slipped inside. Seeing him there, against the backdrop of French provincial furniture and gold-leaf molding, was jarring. He looked like a black-and-white photograph placed in a Technicolor frame. He was holding his hat in one hand and a small rectangular box in the other. "You look beautiful, Ava," he said. His voice was thick, catching in his throat. "Like your mother." I felt the tears prickling. "Daddy, don't make me cry. The makeup artist charged $500 for these lashes." He smiled, but it was a fleeting expression. He didn't come all the way into the room. He stayed near the door, as if he expected someone to come in and shoo him away. "I have something for you," he said. He walked over and placed the small box on the vanity table. Amidst the clutter of setting sprays and diamond earrings, it was a velvet box, but the velvet was worn. The blue faded to a dusty gray. It wasn't the kind of box that held diamonds. "I know it isn't much," he said, looking at his hands. "I know the Wexfords are giving you well. The world, it seems, I can't compete with that." "You don't have to compete," I said, reaching for the box. "You being here is enough." "Open it," he said softly. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a tie clip. It was silver, but tarnished. It was heavy, much heavier than it looked, simple and unadorned except for a few scratches on the surface. It was not a piece of jewelry a bride would wear. It was a man's accessory, and an old one at that. I looked up at him, confused. "A tie clip. It belonged to my father," he said. "And his father before him. It has seen a lot of hard times. Ava, it has seen the Depression. It has seen wars. It has seen the bottom of the barrel." He reached out and touched the box with a calloused finger. "I want you to keep it with you tonight," he said. "Put it in your purse, or pin it inside your dress." "Why?" I asked. He looked at the door, ensuring it was closed, then leaned in close. His voice dropped to a whisper, an urgency in his tone that I had never heard before. "Because I have a feeling about tonight," he said. "I have a feeling that these people, they test you. They test what you are made of." He looked me in the very center of my eyes. "If they go too far, Ava, if they make you feel like you are nothing, if they try to break you, I want you to look at the back of that clip." I frowned, picking up the heavy silver bar. I turned it over, etched into the back, in faint, crude engravings that looked like they had been done by hand with a sharp needle, was a sequence of characters: 7, 4, 1, 9, 8, R-At. "What is this?" I asked. "Is it a date?" "It is a choice," my father said. "If you need the truth, the real truth, not the version they are writing for you, you look at those numbers, and you remember who you are." "Dad, you are scaring me," I said. "What is going on?" Before he could answer, the door flew open. Ethan strode in, bringing a gust of energy and entitlement with him. He was already in his tuxedo, looking devastatingly handsome and utterly frantic. "Ava, we have a crisis with the seating for the senator. We need to—" He stopped when he saw my father. The annoyance on his face was instant and undisguised. "Roy," Ethan said, checking his watch, "you are not supposed to be back here. This is a sterile area. Photos are in 10 minutes. "I was just giving my daughter her gift," Dad said, stepping back. He morphed instantly from the intense, mysterious man who had just spoken to me into the submissive, quiet trucker the Wexfords expected. He lowered his head. He clasped his hands. He made himself small. "Right," Ethan said, dismissing him. "Well, wrap it up. We have a schedule." Ethan grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the door. "Come on, Ava. My mother is having an aneurysm about the centerpieces." I looked back at my father. He was standing by the vanity, watching me go. He gave me a single, slow nod. "Keep it safe." I slipped the tie clip into the hidden pocket of my dress, the cold metal resting against my ribs. Now, hours later, amidst the clinking of champagne flutes and the roar of the reception, that metal felt like it was burning a hole in my side. I was standing near the chocolate fountain, a ridiculous 3-tiered structure that cost more than my first car, when Sarah, my maid of honor and best friend since nursing school, grabbed my arm. Sarah was not a crier. She was an ER nurse who could insert a central line in a moving ambulance, but right now, her face was flushed with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was tight. She dragged me behind a pillar, away from the prying eyes of the videographer who was circling the room like a vulture. "What is it?" I asked. "Is it the cake? Did they drop the cake?" "Screw the cake," Sarah hissed. "It is Daphne. And Graham. I just came from the cocktail lounge." "And, Ava, they aren't just making fun of your dad," Sarah said, her eyes welling up. "It is worse. They are marketing him." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "I heard Daphne talking to the wife of that real estate developer from Charleston," Sarah said. "She was telling a story about how they found you. She made it sound like they rescued you from a homeless shelter. She said they paid off your father's gambling debt so he could afford a suit to attend the wedding." I gasped. "My father doesn't gamble. He has never gambled a day in his life, and he bought that suit with his pension." "I know that," Sarah said, gripping my hands. "But they don't know that. Daphne is spinning this whole narrative. Ava. She is telling everyone that this wedding is their act of benevolence for the year. She is using your family's poverty to make herself look like a saint. You aren't a daughter-in-law to them. You are a tax write-off. You are a charity project." I looked out at the room. I saw Daphne across the dance floor, holding court. She was laughing, her hand resting on the arm of a bishop, looking for all the world like Mother Teresa and Vera Wang. She wasn't just cruel, she was calculating. She had turned my father's simple life into a prop for her own vanity. She had stolen his dignity and sold it for social capital. I felt a wave of nausea. I looked for Ethan. He was standing next to his mother, nodding along as she spoke to the bishop. He knew. He had to know. He was part of the pitch. And there is something else, Sarah said, lowering her voice. The photographer. What about him? I was standing next to the sound booth. Sarah said, I heard the wedding planner talking to the lead photographer, the guy with the ponytail. Celine. Yeah, she told him. Keep the frame clean. She said, if the father is in the shot, widen the aperture or crop him out. We want the Wexford aesthetic, no visual pollution. Visual pollution. My father, the man who worked double shifts to buy me my first stethoscope, the man who drove through ice storms to make sure I had tuition money. They called him visual pollution. I pushed past Sarah. I needed to see. I walked to the edge of the dance floor. The photographer was there, snapping candid shots of the guests mingling. I watched him. My father was standing near the edge of the crowd, holding a glass of water. A group of guests moved near him, laughing. It was a perfect candid moment, genuine emotion. Good lighting. The photographer raised his camera. He focused. Then, he saw my father in the viewfinder. He didn't take the picture. He lowered the camera. He took 2 steps to the left, physically maneuvering his body so that a large floral arrangement blocked my father from view. Then, and only then, did he raise the camera again and click the shutter. He erased him, in real time. It wasn't an accident. It was a standing order. I looked at my dad. He was still standing there, by the service entrance, isolated in a room of 500 people. He wasn't looking at the camera. He wasn't looking at the guests who ignored him. He was looking at me. His face was terrifyingly calm. There was no anger. There was no shame. It was the face of a man who was counting down the seconds. It was the stillness of a predator waiting for the wind to shift. I remembered the weight against my ribs. If they go too far. They hadn't just gone too far. They had crossed a border into a country they didn't understand. I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress. My fingers brushed the cold, scratched silver of the tie clip. I traced the numbers on the back with my thumb. 7, 4, 1, 9, 8. Why did a retired truck driver have a code? Why did he have a lawyer on speed dial who looked like he worked for the Pentagon? Why did he tell me that poverty was a lesson, not a condition? For the first time in my life, I looked at my father and realized I didn't know him. I knew the dad who grilled burgers and fixed leaky faucets. I didn't know this man. The man standing near the exit wasn't a victim. He was a Trojan horse. And the Wexfords, in their arrogance, had wheeled him right into the center of their fortress. I squeezed the tie clip until the metal dug into my skin. What are you hiding? Dad. Ethan appeared at my elbow, startling me. Ava, there you are. We need to cut the cake. The lighting is perfect right now. He reached for my waist, his touch possessing, assuming. Smile, he said. Everyone is watching. I looked at my husband. I looked at the man who had let his sister throw wine on my father, who had let his mother call us charity cases, who had let the photographer erase my history. Yes, I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Everyone is watching. I walked with him toward the cake, but my mind was not on the 5 tiers of vanilla sponge. My mind was on the tie clip in my pocket, and the devastating possibility that the poor old man in the corner was about to buy and sell every soul in this room. The sound of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal champagne flute is supposed to be the most celebratory sound in the world. It is the sound that heralds a toast to love, to the future, to the union of 2 souls. But as Graham Wexford stood up at the center of the head table, tapping his glass with a rhythmic, demanding insistence, it sounded to me like a gavel banging in a courtroom. The room fell silent. 500 faces turned toward the stage. The waiters froze in the shadows. The air conditioning hummed, a low, artificial drone that seemed to vibrate against my skin. Graham adjusted his microphone. He did not look at me. He looked at the audience. He looked at the investors, the partners, the people who mattered to his bottom line. Ladies and gentlemen, Graham began, his voice booming with the practiced cadence of a man used to commanding boardrooms. Thank you for being here to witness this acquisition. He paused for laughter. The room chuckled obediently. It was a business joke, a Wexford joke. I kid, of course, Graham continued, flashing a white, shark-like smile. But in all seriousness, today is a proud day for the Wexford family. When Ethan first brought Ava home, we saw something in her. We saw potential. We saw a diamond in the rough that just needed the right setting to truly shine. I sat frozen in my chair. A diamond in the rough. It was a polite way of saying I was dirt before they found me. We have been happy to open our doors to Ava, Graham said, gesturing to me with a magnanimous sweep of his hand. To lift her up into this life, to give her the stability and the platform she deserves. It has been our pleasure to guide her, to mold her, and to welcome her into a world she might never have experienced otherwise. He was not talking about a marriage. He was talking about a charity case. He was taking credit for my existence. I looked at Ethan. He was beaming. He was nodding along, raising his glass slightly as if to say, "Yes, thank you for fixing her, Dad." "And, of course," Graham said, his eyes shifting. He looked over the heads of the crowd, past the diamonds and the designer gowns, all the way to the back corner of the room. "We must not forget where she came from." The spotlight operator, sensing the cue, swung the beam of light. It swept across the room and landed, harsh and blinding, on table 42. It landed on my father. Roy Turner was sitting alone. The other guests at his table had gone to the bar. He was nursing a glass of iced tea. When the light hit him, he blinked, shielding his eyes with his hand. He looked small. He looked exposed. "Roy," Graham boomed into the microphone, "I hope you are enjoying yourself back there. The view is a bit distant, I know, but the catering is the same." The crowd laughed. It was a ripple of amusement at the expense of the outsider. "Tell me, Roy," Graham continued, leaning into the podium, enjoying his moment. "Is this the biggest party you have ever seen? I bet it is a far cry from the truck stops. Isn't it? Enjoy it, my friend. Drink the good stuff tonight. It is on me." The laughter was louder this time. It wasn't just polite amusement anymore. It was mocking. It was the sound of the pack turning on the weak. Daphne Wexford, seated to my left, brought a napkin to her lips to hide her smile. But her eyes were crinkled with delight. She was enjoying the show. Then, from the table directly below the stage, Blake Wexford chimed in. She didn't have a microphone, but she didn't need one. Her voice was shrill and carried perfectly in the brief silence following the laughter. "Don't worry, Daddy," Blake called out. "He is sitting right next to the emergency exit. He is probably just keeping it clear for the staff. Old habits die hard." The room erupted. People were actually clapping. They thought it was hilarious. They thought roasting a 64-year-old man for his profession was the height of comedy. I looked at my father. He didn't shrink. He didn't cry. He simply stood up. He placed his napkin on the table. He buttoned his jacket, the jacket with the wine stain still visible on the chest. He looked at me across the vast, shining distance of the ballroom. He gave me a small, sad nod. Then he turned around and pushed open the service doors. He walked out. He was leaving. He was removing himself from the equation so I wouldn't have to be embarrassed by him anymore. Something inside me broke. It wasn't a snap. It was a disintegration. The fear, the desire to please, the desperation to fit into this crystal world, it all dissolved instantly, leaving behind something cold, hard, and absolutely clear. I stood up. "Ava, sit down," Ethan hissed, grabbing my wrist under the table. "He is just going to the bathroom. Don't make a scene." I looked at Ethan's hand on my wrist. I looked at his manicured fingernails. I looked at the gold watch his father had given him for graduation. "Let go of me," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was different. It was a voice Ethan had never heard before. He was so surprised that his grip loosened. I pulled my hand away. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at Graham or Daphne. I turned and walked off the stage. "Ava," Daphne whispered loudly, "where are you going? The cake cutting is next." I ignored her. I walked down the steps. my heavy silk train trailing behind me. I walked through the tables. I walked through the whispers. I walked past the people who had just laughed at my father. I pushed through the service doors into the kitchen corridor. The noise of the party vanished, replaced by the clatter of dishes and the shouting of chefs. I saw my father halfway down the hallway, walking toward the exit sign. "Dad," I called out. He stopped. His shoulders slumped. He turned around slowly, and the look on his face shattered my heart. He looked ashamed. "I am sorry, honey," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to ruin it. I thought it would be better if I wasn't in there. I make them uncomfortable. I make you look bad." I ran to him. I didn't care about the dress. I didn't care about the $300 shoes. I grabbed his hands. They were rough, calloused, and shaking. "You make me look bad," I asked, choking back a sob. "Dad, you are the only thing in that room that is real. I am just a truck driver, Ava," he said, looking at the floor. "They are right. I don't belong here. You stay. You go back in there. This is your future. Don't throw it away for an old man." My future. I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. If that is my future, a room full of people who think cruelty is funny, then I don't want it. I looked at his face. I saw the years of hard work etched into his skin. I saw the sacrifices he made. I remembered the nights he came home exhausted but still had time to help me with my math homework. I remembered the peanut butter sandwiches we ate when money was tight, and how he always gave me the bigger half. "You told me once," I said, squeezing his hands. "You said never to trade my self-respect for acceptance." He looked up at me, his eyes widening. "I am not trading it, Dad," I said. "Not today, not ever." "Ava, what are you going to do?" he asked. I let go of his hands. I reached up and wiped the tears from my own face. I smoothed down the front of my dress. I stood up straight, pulling my shoulders back, mimicking the posture I had seen Daphne use 1,000 times. But I wasn't channeling her arrogance. I was channeling my father's strength. "I am going to finish the speech," I said. "Ava, don't," he said. "Just let it go. Let's just leave." "No," I said. "If we leave now, they win. If we leave now, they get to keep their story. They get to say, I was the ungrateful girl who couldn't handle the pressure. They get to keep laughing." I turned back toward the doors. "I am going to give them the truth." I pushed the doors open and walked back into the ballroom. The room was still buzzing with conversation, but as I walked in, the noise began to die down. People turned to look. I was walking fast, with purpose. I wasn't walking toward my seat. I was walking toward the stage. Ethan stood up as I approached. He looked relieved, then annoyed. "Finally," he said as I climbed the steps. "Jesus, Ava, sit down. My dad is about to introduce the best man." I walked past him. I didn't even acknowledge his presence. I walked straight to the podium where Graham was still standing, sipping his champagne. He looked at me with a condescending smile. "Back from the little girl's room. Good. Let's proceed." I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. I didn't ask for it. I took it. Graham looked shocked. He started to say something, but I turned my back on him. I faced the room, the 500 guests, the investors, the sharks. I gripped the microphone stand. My knuckles were white. The silence in the room was absolute. They were waiting for an apology. They were waiting for me to say I was overwhelmed by their generosity. "My father," I said. My voice was steady. It echoed through the massive speakers, clear and cold. "My father drove a truck for 35 years. I paused. I saw Daphne stiffen in her seat. I saw Ethan's face go pale. "He missed birthdays," I continued. "He missed holidays. He slept in erratic shifts and ate bad food and ruined his back. Do you know why?" I looked directly at Blake, who was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. "He did it so that I could go to college," I said. "He did it so that I could have braces. He did it so that I would never have to feel the way he felt when he couldn't pay a bill." I scanned the room. Graham Wexford just told you that he lifted me up, I said. He told you that he gave me a platform. He told you that I was a diamond in the rough. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound into the microphone. The Wexford family didn't lift me up, I said. They dressed me up. There is a difference. Ava, Graham barked from behind me. That is enough. Give me the mic. I ignored him. I raised my voice. You all laughed when my father was mocked tonight, I said. You laughed at his shoes. You laughed at his job. You laughed when wine was thrown on him. You thought it was funny because you think wealth makes you superior. You think money buys you the right to treat people like furniture. I looked at Ethan. He was standing there, paralyzed. He wasn't coming to stop me. He wasn't standing by my side. He was terrified of his father. He was a coward in a tuxedo. I learned more about dignity from a man in a stained suit than I will ever learn from any of you in this room, I said. Then I delivered the sentence that I knew would end my life as I knew it. Whoever looks down on the man who raised me, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that carried to every corner of the room, will never stand beside me. I reached for my left hand. I felt the cold metal of the diamond engagement ring, the ring Ethan had picked out with his mother. The ring that was a family heirloom I was merely borrowing. I pulled it off. I turned to Ethan. He looked at me with wide, panicked eyes. Ava, he whispered, don't do this. Think about the contract. Think about the humiliation. I am thinking about it, I said. I grabbed his hand. I pressed the ring into his palm. The wedding is over, I said into the microphone. Please clear the room. I dropped the mic. It hit the floor with a deafening thud that caused feedback to shriek through the speakers. The sound was like a scream, piercing the polite silence of the ballroom. Graham was purple with rage. You ungrateful little... I didn't stay to hear the rest. I walked down the stairs. I didn't run. I walked. I walked down the center aisle. The same aisle I was supposed to walk down as a beloved bride. Now, I walked it as an exile. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. Their faces a mixture of shock and horror. I reached the back of the room. My father was standing there holding the door open. He was looking at me with tears in his eyes. But they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of pride. He offered me his arm. I took it. Let's go, Dad, I said. We walked out of the ballroom together, leaving the silence, the champagne, and the Wexfords behind us. I thought I was walking away from everything. I thought I had just burned my life to the ground. I didn't know that the fire was just starting, and I didn't know that the man walking beside me had the gasoline. The fallout did not happen gradually. It did not trickle in like a leaking faucet. It hit with the force of a dam breaking, sweeping away the remnants of my privacy in less than 12 hours. I had taken my father back to the small, 2-bedroom bungalow I rented in Savannah. We had driven in silence, the radio off, the headlights cutting through the darkness of the interstate. I thought the silence was peace. I was wrong. It was merely the quiet before the artillery barrage. By 7 the next morning, my phone was vibrating so constantly across the bedside table that it sounded like a drill. I picked it up, squinting against the harsh blue light. I had 84 missed calls, 300 text messages, and my social media notifications were capped at 99 plus in red bubbles that looked like warning lights. I opened Instagram first. It was a mistake. The top trending hashtag in the state was Gold Digger Bride. Someone, likely the videographer who had been instructed to erase my father, had uploaded a clip of my speech. But it wasn't the speech I had given. It was a butchered, surgical edit. In the video, Graham's insults were gone. Blake's wine throwing was gone. The context of my father's humiliation was entirely excised. The clip started mid-sentence. It showed me standing on stage, looking manic, shouting, "The Wexford family didn't lift me up. I want to give them the truth. Whoever looks down on me will never stand beside me. The wedding is over." Then, a splice, a clip from earlier in the night, taken out of context, where I was asking Ethan about the honeymoon budget. The caption read, "Bride throws tantrum after being denied access to family accounts. Classless." The comments were a cesspool. "She looks unhinged. Trash trying to marry cash. Glad they dodged a bullet." I heard she demanded a house in her name before the ceremony. Look at her dress. You can put a gown on a pig, but it is still a pig. My hands shook so hard, I dropped the phone on the duvet. They weren't just telling a different version of the story, they were constructing a completely new reality. My father was in the kitchen making coffee. He was wearing his old flannel robe, the one with the hole in the pocket. He looked at me as I walked in, my face pale. "Don't look at it, Ava," he said gently. "It is just noise." "It is not noise, Dad," I said, my voice rising. "It is a campaign." The landline rang. I didn't even know anyone had my landline number anymore. I answered it. "You have made a very expensive mistake, Ava." Daphne Wexford's voice was as crisp and cold as dry ice. She wasn't yelling. She sounded bored, like she was discussing a caterer who had delivered the wrong linens. "Daphne," I said, "you people are sick. You edited that video." "We are managing the narrative," she corrected. "You caused a scene. You embarrassed the firm. Graham had to calm down 3 major investors last night because of your little theatrical performance. Do you have any idea how much capital was at risk?" "I don't care about your capital," I spat. "You should," she said, "because you are about to lose yours. You signed a prenuptial agreement, Ava. Clause 14 regarding image rights and non-disparagement. You disparaged the family in front of 500 witnesses. We are going to sue you for breach of contract. We are going to sue you for emotional distress. And we are going to sue you for the cost of the wedding." "I didn't sign the marriage license," I said. "The prenup is void." "Read the fine print, dear," Daphne said. The non-disclosure and image clauses were binding upon signature. Regardless of the consummation of the marriage, we own your silence, and since you broke it, we are going to break you. She hung up. I stood there, holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone. Then came the text from Ethan. "Ava, please, Mom is on the warpath. She is talking about litigation that will bankrupt you. Just issue a public apology. Say you were stressed. Say you had a reaction to medication. Say whatever. If you apologize and take the blame, I can get her to go easy on you. I still love you. Don't throw this away." I stared at the screen, a reaction to medication. He wanted me to plead insanity. He wanted me to tell the world I was crazy so his family could look benevolent for tolerating me. "Block him," my dad said. He had taken the phone from my hand. He read the text, his jaw tightening. "Block all of them." "Dad, they are going to sue me," I said, panic rising in my chest. "They have an army of lawyers. I have a checking account with $4,000 in it." "Let them come," Dad said. He poured a cup of coffee and set it down in front of me. "Drink this." But the assault wasn't just digital. At 10 o'clock, my personal cell rang again. It was Dr. Henderson, the medical director at the hospital where I worked. "Ava," he said. He sounded uncomfortable. "I think it is best if you don't come in for your shifts this week." "Excuse me?" I asked. "I am on the schedule. We are short-staffed. We received some calls," Henderson said. "From the Wexford board. They are major donors. Ava, you know that. They are raising concerns about your stability. They sent us a video. It raises questions about your judgment under pressure." "That video is doctored," I screamed. "Dr. Henderson, you know me. I have run that ER for 3 years. I handle trauma every single night." "I know," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But they are threatening to pull the funding for the new pediatric wing. They are saying it is a moral clause issue. Just take some administrative leave. Let it blow over." I ended the call and sank onto the kitchen floor. They were taking my job. They were taking my reputation. They were systematically dismantling my life piece by piece. Around noon, Sarah arrived. She looked like she hadn't slept. She was carrying a laptop and a folder of papers. She locked the door behind her and pulled the blinds shut. "You need to see this," she said. She opened the laptop on the kitchen table. "So, after you left, chaos ensued," Sarah said. "But I stayed. I pretended to be helping the staff clean up so I could listen. I saw the Wexford's lead counsel, that guy Mercer, drop a file on the table while he was arguing with Graham. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper out of her bag. It was a photocopy. I snapped a picture of it and printed it out at Kinko's on the way here, she said. I looked at the document. It was dated 2 weeks before the wedding. It was titled, Contingency Protocol C, Separation and Asset Recovery. I read the bullet points. 1. In the event of separation, characterize the subject Ava Turner as financially unstable. 2. Pre-draft press releases regarding subject's incompatibility with Wexford values. 3. Leverage hospital board connections to neutralize subject's professional credibility. 4. Utilize mental health narrative to discredit any potential whistleblowing. I felt the blood drain from my face. They planned it, I whispered. They didn't just react to last night. They had this ready. They never intended for you to be a permanent part of the family, Sarah said grimly. They treated you like a leased car. They had a plan for how to return you to the lot the moment you scratched the paint. My father picked up the paper. He read it slowly, his eyes scanning every line. He didn't look surprised. He looked confirmed. They think they are gods, Dad said softly. They think people are just chess pieces. We have to get a lawyer, I said. But who would go against Wexford Meridian in this state? They own half the judges. My dad walked over to the window. He peered through the blinds at the street. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked 3 houses down. It hadn't moved in an hour. Ava, Dad said, do you still have the box I gave you? The tie clip, I asked. It is in my purse. Get it. I retrieved the tarnished silver clip. I brought it to him. You looked at the back, he asked. Yes, a bunch of numbers and arat. Read them to me again, he said. 7, 4, 1, 9, 8, I read. And then the letters. It is not a date, Dad said. It is a box number. A P.O. box. No, he said. A safety deposit box. He turned to me. The facade of the simple, weary truck driver was slipping. In its place was something else, a sharpness. A command presence that I hadn't noticed because I had spent my whole life seeing him through the lens of my poor dad. There is an address engraved on the inside of the clip's hinge, he said. You need a magnifying glass to see it, but I know it by heart. I squinted at the tiny mechanism of the clip. There, barely visible to the naked eye, was a line of text. 1200 Peachtree Street, NE, Suite 4000, Atlanta. What is at Peachtree Street? I asked. A firm called Crescent Vale, Dad said. They are trustees. Trustees for who? For the truth, Dad said cryptically. Suddenly, my phone rang again, but it wasn't a block number, and it wasn't the hospital. It was a number with an Atlanta area code. I looked at Dad. He nodded. Answer it. I swiped the green button. Hello? Ms. Ava Turner. The voice was deep, male, and incredibly polished. It sounded like the voice of a man who wore suits that cost more than my education. Yes, I said hesitantly. Who is this? My name is Arthur Hale, the man said. I am the senior partner at Hale, Mercer Row. I represent a very specific client who has been monitoring the situation regarding the Wexford family. I don't have money for a lawyer, I said defensively. If you are selling services, I am not selling anything, Ms. Turner. Hale interrupted. I have been retained on your behalf. My retainer was paid 30 years ago. I froze. 30 years ago, I was a toddler. Correct, Hale said. I am calling to inform you that a security protocol was activated last night. When Roy Turner walked out of that ballroom, a signal was sent to my office. I looked at my father. He was standing by the window, watching the black SUV. He looked calm, deadly calm. I don't understand, I stammered. You don't need to understand yet, Hale said. You just need to move. The Wexfords are filing an emergency injunction to freeze your bank accounts by 5 o'clock today. They are trying to starve you out. How do you know that? Because I know their playbook better than they do, Hale said. Ms. Turner, The car parked down the street is not the police. It is a private investigator hired by Graham Wexford to dig through your trash. You are not safe in Savannah. Where am I supposed to go? Come to Atlanta, Hale said. Come to the address on the tie clip. Bring the key. The key, I asked. I don't have a key. I just have the clip. Look closer at the box the clip came in, Dad said from across the room. I looked at the worn velvet box on the table. I ripped the lining out. Underneath the yellowed cotton was a small, flat, silver key. Ms. Turner, Hale's voice came back on the line. It is time you stopped playing by their rules. Come to my office. It is time you met the man your father actually is. Who is he? I whispered, looking at the man in the flannel robe who had raised me on mac and cheese and love. He is the man who is going to buy the Wexford's world and sell it for parts. Hale said, We are waiting for you. The line went dead. I looked at my father. Pack a bag, Ava, he said. We are going to Atlanta, and wear something nice. You have a board meeting to attend. The drive to Atlanta took 4 hours, but it felt like we were traveling through time. We left the suffocating humidity of Savannah and the wreckage of my reputation behind, arriving in the sprawling metallic heart of the capital just as the afternoon sun began to bounce off the glass towers. My father drove his 10-year-old pickup truck. He drove it with the same careful, steady hands he had used to drive me to kindergarten, tapping the steering wheel to a classic rock station, looking for all the world like a man who was worried about the price of gas. We pulled up to a building on Peachtree Street that looked like a shard of blue ice piercing the sky. It was the kind of building where the lobby had its own climate, and the security guards wore suits that fit better than Ethan's tuxedo. Dad, I said, clutching my purse where the tie clip and key sat like a heavy secret. We can't park here. Valet is probably $50. It is handled, Dad said. He pulled the truck right up to the front entrance. Amidst a line of black town cars and German sedans, a valet rushed over, looking ready to tell us to move along. He took one look at the dented bumper, frowned, and then looked at my father's face. The valet paused. He glanced at a small sticker on the windshield, something I had never noticed before. Just a simple barcode. The valet's posture snapped straight. Mr. Turner, good afternoon, sir. I will keep it close. I stared at my father. He knows you. He knows the truck, Dad said vaguely, opening his door. Come on. Arthur is waiting. We took the elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened directly into a lobby that smelled of old leather and money. The sign on the frosted glass wall read, Crescent Vale Trustees. The reception area was silent. A woman behind a marble desk, who looked like she ran a small country in her spare time, stood up immediately when we walked in. She did not look at my wrinkled dress or my messy hair. She looked at my father, who was still wearing his flannel shirt and jeans. Mr. Turner, she said, her voice filled with a reverence that made my skin prickle. Mr. Hale is in the boardroom. The partners are assembled. Partners, I whispered to Dad. I thought we were seeing a lawyer. Just walk, honey, he said. We walked down a long corridor lined with modern art that I knew cost more than the hospital wing I worked in. We reached a set of double doors at the end of the hall. The receptionist opened them for us. The boardroom was massive. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. Seated around a table made of a single slab of walnut were 4 men and 2 women. They were all dressed in impeccable business attire. They all had legal pads and tablets in front of them. And when my father, the man who clipped coupons for tuna fish, the man who fixed his own plumbing with duct tape, walked into the room, they all stood up. It wasn't the polite standing of a host greeting a guest. It was the deferential standing of soldiers greeting a general. Please, sit, Dad said, waving a hand casually. He walked to the head of the table. He didn't sit in the chair. He just leaned against it, looking at the room. This is my daughter, Ava, he said. We know, said the man at the closest seat. It was Arthur Hale, the voice from the phone. He was older than he sounded, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. It is a pleasure to finally meet you. Ms. Turner? What is going on? I asked, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. Why is everyone standing? Why did the valet know your truck? Dad looked at Hale. Show her. Hale slid a thick leather portfolio across the table toward me. It was embossed with the initials RT. I opened it. The first page was a corporate history summary. At the top was a logo I recognized instantly, a stylized globe with wings. Turner Freight Systems. I frowned. Turner Freight. I see their trucks on the highway all the time. They are huge. They do logistics for Amazon, Walmart, everyone. Read the founding date, Hale said gently. Founded 1985 by Roy Turner. I read it again. Then I looked at the next line. Majority stake sold to Global Logistics Partners in 2015. Retained assets moved to Turner Family Trust. I flipped the page. There was a balance sheet. I saw numbers. A lot of numbers. I saw a column for assets. I saw a column for liquid capital. I saw a column for diversified investments. I stopped at the bottom line. The number was so long it didn't look real. It looked like a serial number. Total asset valuation, $1.2 billion. The air left the room. My vision blurred. I looked at the number again. 1.2 billion. I looked at my father. He was just standing there, picking at a loose thread on his flannel cuff. Dad, I whispered, is this real? It is, he said. But my mind was racing, crashing against the memories of my childhood. But we lived in a 2-bedroom house. We drove used cars. I took out loans for nursing school. Dad, I remember you worrying about the electric bill in the summer of '98. I remember we ate grilled cheese for a week because the truck needed a new alternator. I worried about the bill because I wanted to teach you the value of $1, Dad said quietly. And we ate grilled cheese because I like grilled cheese. You let me take out loans, I said, a spark of anger igniting in the shock. I am still paying them off. I worked double shifts. I missed holidays. I was exhausted. Dad, and you were sitting on $1 billion. And look at you, Dad said. He walked over to me, placing his hands on the back of the chair opposite me. You are the head coordinator of a major trauma center. You earned every promotion. You earned every degree. You know how to work. You know how to struggle. You know who you are without a safety net. You lied to me, I said, tears stinging my eyes. My whole life was a lie. No, he said firmly. The money is the lie. Ava, he gestured around the room. This isn't real life. This is a bubble. If you had grown up knowing I could buy the hospital you were born in, do you think you would be the woman you are today? Or would you be Blake Wexford? The name hit me like a slap. Blake, the girl who threw wine on people because she knew she could buy a new carpet. Blake, who had never worked a day in her life. I saw what money did to my friends when we started making it big in the 90s, Dad continued. I saw their kids turn into monsters. I saw them lose their souls. I made a choice. Ava. I decided that my daughter was going to be raised by a father, not a checkbook. I wanted you to build a backbone before I gave you a bank account. I looked down at the portfolio. I thought about the nights I cried over tuition. I thought about the pride I felt when I bought my first car with my own money. I thought about the way I stood up to Graham Wexford last night. Would I have done that if I had grown up a billionaire heiress, or would I have just signed a check to make the problem go away? I wasn't poor, Dad said softly. I was just quiet. I wanted to protect you from the sharks until you were strong enough to swim with them. And after last night, I think you are ready to swim. I took a deep breath. The anger didn't vanish, but it shifted. It settled into something heavier, something more solid, understanding. Okay, I said, wiping my eyes. Okay, so you are a billionaire, and the Wexfords treated you like a beggar. The irony is not lost on us, Arthur Hale said dryly. In fact, it is the centerpiece of our strategy. Strategy? I asked. Hale opened a second file. Wexford Meridian. They are a property development giant. Yes, but they are currently overextended. They are building a massive luxury waterfront complex in Charleston, the Riverfront Project. I know it, I said. Ethan wouldn't shut up about it. He said it was going to make the family trillionaires. I stopped. He said it was going to make them huge money. It will, Hale said, if they can finish it, but they are bleeding cash. They needed a massive injection of capital to secure the final phase of construction. They went to the sovereign wealth funds, they went to the big banks, and they went to private equity trusts. Hale tapped a document in the file. 3 months ago, Wexford Meridian secured a loan of $200 million to keep the project alive. It is a high-interest bridge loan, very strict terms. If they default, or if there is a significant adverse event that threatens the project's viability, the lender has the right to call in the full amount immediately. I looked at the document. The lender was listed as CVT Holdings, LLC. CVT, I read. Then I looked at the sign on the wall. Crescent Vale Trustees. I looked at my father. He was smiling, a small, tight smile. You own their debt, I whispered. The trust owns the debt, Dad corrected. I just advised the trust. But yes, technically speaking, Graham Wexford has been buying his champagne with my money for the last 90 days. My jaw dropped. The people who had mocked his shoes, who had called him a peasant, who were currently trying to sue me for being poor, they were living on his credit. They don't know, I asked. Graham Wexford is too arrogant to look behind the curtain of an LLC, Hale said. He just saw the money and signed the papers. He has no idea that CVT stands for Crescent Vale Turner. So what happens now? I asked. Dad pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. We have a choice, Ava, he said. We can reveal this. We can pull the loan. We can bankrupt them by Friday. I can take their company, their houses, and that hotel they love so much. I can leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. He leaned forward. But that is revenge, he said. And revenge is a dirty business. It leaves stains that don't wash out. He pushed the portfolio toward me. Or, he said, we can use this leverage to get justice. We can force them to tell the truth. We can force them to restore your reputation. We can make them admit who they really are to the world. He looked at me, the question hanging in the air between us. I kept this money secret to give you a choice, Ava, he said. Now you have to make one. Do you want to destroy them, or do you want to teach them? I thought about Daphne's phone call. We are going to break you. I thought about the edited video. I thought about Dr. Henderson telling me not to come to work. I thought about the look on my father's face when Blake threw the wine. Destroying them would be easy. It would be satisfying. I could snap my fingers and watch their world burn. But then I remembered who I was. I was a nurse. I fixed things. I healed people. And I was the daughter of Roy Turner, a man who built an empire without ever losing his humanity. If I destroyed them, I became them. I became just another rich person using money as a weapon to hurt people I didn't like. I don't want to be like them, I said slowly. I don't want to ruin their lives just because I can. That is what they did to me. Dad nodded, watching me closely. But I won't let them win, I said, my voice hardening. I won't let them lie about us, and I won't let them treat anyone else the way they treated you. I looked at Arthur Hale. I want them to stop looking down on people, I said. I want to strip away their disguise. I want everyone to see them for exactly what they are, bullies living on borrowed time and borrowed money. I want to buy back our dignity. And the lawsuit? Hale asked. The smear campaign. We kill it, I said. Not with a settlement, with the truth. We make them retract every single lie, publicly. Dad sat back in his chair. He looked at me with a pride that was worth more than the $1 billion on the balance sheet. That, Dad said, sounded like a decision. He turned to Hale. Arthur, initiate the protocol, Dad said. Call the meeting. Tell Graham Wexford that his primary lender has some concerns about the stability of his family. Tell him we need an emergency board meeting in Charlotte, tomorrow morning. And tell him, I added, standing up and smoothing my dress, that the representative for the trust will be attending in person. Hale raised an eyebrow. And who is the representative? I picked up the heavy silver tie clip from the table. I snapped it shut with a click that sounded like a pistol cocking. "I am," I said. "The war room at Hale." Mercer Row was not designed for comfort. It was designed for war. The conference table was covered in server logs, financial schematics, and dossiers on every member of the Wexford board. It had been 24 hours since we arrived in Atlanta, and the air conditioning was humming at a low, aggressive temperature that kept everyone alert. My father sat at the head of the table, not as a client, but as a commander. He had traded his flannel for a crisp white button-down, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He didn't look like a truck driver anymore. He looked like what he was, a man who understood leverage better than anyone in the room. "Status on the digital containment?" Dad asked, not looking up from a stack of loan agreements. Arthur Hale gestured to a young woman typing furiously at a terminal in the corner. "We have issued cease and desist orders to the 3 major platforms hosting the altered video. We cited copyright infringement initially since the videographer didn't have a release form signed by you for commercial distribution, which forced an automatic takedown. The viral clip is dark. It will pop up again on smaller sites, but the main hemorrhage has stopped." "And the tabloids?" I asked. "Served with libel notices an hour ago," Hale said. "We attached the raw, unedited audio file of your speech as evidence of malicious editing. Their legal departments are currently panicking. They expected a terrified bride, Ava. They got a shark. It was a start, but it was defensive. We needed to go on the offense." "I need to talk to Simon Kress," I said. The room went quiet. Hale looked at me over his glasses. "The former CFO of Wexford Meridian. He was fired 6 months ago for gross incompetence." "At least, that is the official story?" "It is a lie," I said. "Ethan complained about him constantly. He said Kress was difficult because he refused to sign off on discretionary spending for Daphne. Ethan told me Kress was a stickler for the rules. If anyone knows where the bodies are buried, it is him. He is currently working as a freelance auditor out of a small office in Decatur," Hale said, tapping his tablet. "He signed a non-disclosure agreement. NDAs are void if they cover up criminal activity," Dad said. "Go get him. Ava, take Mercer with you." I met Simon Kress at a diner that smelled of grease and lemon polish. He was a nervous man, balding, with coffee stains on his tie. When I walked in with Mercer, a 6'4" attorney, who looked like a linebacker in a suit, Kress looked like he might bolt for the door. "I am not talking to the press," Kress said, clutching his mug. "I am not the press," I said, sliding into the booth opposite him. "I am the woman Daphne Wexford is trying to destroy, and I think you know how that feels." Kress looked at me. He recognized me from the news. A flicker of sympathy crossed his face. "They did a number on you," he muttered. "The gold digger angle. Classic Daphne." "I need to know about the foundation." "Simon," I said. "The Wexford Family Charity. Daphne claims it funds orphanages and arts programs, but looking at their public tax filings, the administrative costs are 40%. That is impossible for a nonprofit." Kress looked around the diner. He lowered his voice. "It is not a charity. It is a slush fund. Daphne uses it to funnel lifestyle expenses, the trips to Paris, donor scouting, the jewelry, gifts for gala auctions that never happen. She writes it all off. I refused to certify the audit last year. That is why they fired me." "And the Riverfront project?" Mercer asked, his pen hovering over a yellow pad. Kress laughed, a bitter barking sound. "The jewel in the crown. Graham is obsessed with it, but the land isn't stable. The environmental impact study showed heavy metal contamination in the soil from an old textile mill on the site. Remediation would cost $50 million. Graham didn't have $50 million, so he paid a consultant to reevaluate the samples." "He buried the report?" I asked, feeling sick. "He buried it deep," Kress said. "If that gets out, the EPA shuts them down. The bank loans get called. The whole house of cards collapses." "Will you testify?" Mercer asked. Kress hesitated. "They will sue me into oblivion." "We will protect you," I said. and we will make sure you are the one who lights the match." When we got back to the office, the atmosphere had shifted. My father was no longer looking at loan agreements. He was looking at a screen filled with scrolling market data. "We have the ammunition from Cress," I said, throwing my notebook on the table. "Fraud, embezzlement, environmental violations. We can go to the authorities." "Not yet," Dad said. "If we go to the police, it becomes a criminal matter. It drags on for years. The Wexfords will hire expensive defense lawyers and delay until the public forgets. I don't want them in jail. Ava, I want them irrelevant." He pointed to the screen. "I have been busy too," Dad said. "While you were digging for dirt, I was going shopping." "Shopping for what?" "Debt," Dad said. "Everyone thinks you control a company by buying stock, but stock just makes you an owner. Buying debt makes you a master." He traced a line on the graph. "Wexford Meridian issued corporate bonds 5 years ago to fund their expansion. They are high-yield, risky bonds. Most investors are trying to dump them because of the rumors about the riverfront project." "So you bought them?" "I didn't just buy them," Dad said, his eyes hard. "I cornered the market. As of 10 minutes ago, the Turner Trust owns 65% of Wexford Meridian's outstanding debt. We are their mortgage holder, their credit card company, and their banker all rolled into one." "What does that mean?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around the scale of it. "It means," Arthur Hale interjected, "that under the terms of the bond agreement, if the company's liquidity drops below a certain threshold, which it will, once we expose the charity fraud, the majority debt holder has the right to step in. We can demand an immediate restructuring. We can fire the board. We can seize assets to cover the loan. We can take the company," I realized. "We can take the keys to the castle," Dad corrected, "and lock them out in the cold." But there was one more piece of the puzzle. Hale slid a folder across the table. It was thinner than the others. "We did a forensic sweep of your digital footprint, as you asked," Hale said softly, "to prepare for the lawsuit. We found some emails that were deleted from the Wexford server but remained in the cloud cache." I opened the folder. It was an email thread between Daphne Wexford and the PR firm they had hired to smear me. The subject line was Narrative Control, the bride, but it wasn't Daphne's name that made my breath catch. It was the sender of the second email, from Ethan Wexford to Daphne Wexford. Sent 2 days before the wedding, I read the text. "Mom, make sure the press release emphasizes her emotional volatility. Don't make her look like a criminal. It reflects badly on my taste. Just make her look unstable, like she couldn't handle the pressure of our world. That way, when we annul the marriage, I look like the sympathetic victim who tried to save her." I stared at the words. My taste. Sympathetic victim. He hadn't just been passive. He hadn't just been a coward who couldn't stand up to his mother. He had been a co-conspirator. He had helped draft the script for my destruction while he was sleeping in my bed. The last tiny shred of heartbreak I felt for Ethan Wexford evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, surgical precision. "He signed it," I whispered. "He did," Hale said. "And that gives us our legal hook." Hale pulled out the prenup, the thick document I had foolishly signed. He flipped to page 40. "Clause 22, Hale said. "The good faith clause. It states that neither party shall engage in conspiracy to damage the reputation or professional standing of the other during the engagement period. If they do, the entire agreement is null and void." Meaning the confidentiality clause is dead, Hale said, smiling for the first time. "Meaning you can talk, you can tell the world everything, and meaning we can sue Ethan personally for civil conspiracy." Dad stood up. He buttoned his cuffs. "It is time," he said. "Time for what?" I asked. "Arthur has called an emergency meeting of the Senior Creditor Committee for tomorrow morning at the Wexford headquarters in Charlotte," Dad said. Graham tried to refuse, but Arthur reminded him that under the bond terms, refusal to meet with a majority creditor triggers an automatic default. "They have to meet us," I said. "They have to meet the money," Dad said. "They don't know the money is us." Dad walked over to the coat rack and grabbed his old, worn fedora. He looked at it, then tossed it aside. He picked up a new jacket, a tailored, midnight blue blazer that cost more than my car. He put it on. It fit him perfectly. He turned to me. "You have a choice, Ava," he said. "You can stay here in Atlanta. Let the lawyers handle it. You never have to see them again." I looked at the email from Ethan one last time. I looked at the report on the poisoned soil. I looked at the file on the stolen charity money. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of the power suit I had bought an hour ago. "No," I said. "I'm coming. I want to see their faces when they realize the poor relations just bought the mortgage on their lives." Dad offered me his arm. "Then let's go get your dignity back." We walked out of the office, leaving the war room behind. We weren't just going to a meeting. We were going to an execution. And for the first time in days, I wasn't afraid. I was the one holding the axe. The headquarters of Wexford Meridian in Charlotte was a monolith of blue glass and steel that screamed power. It was designed to intimidate. The boardroom on the 50th floor was the altar where Graham Wexford worshipped himself. I walked into the lobby at 9 o'clock sharp. I was not wearing the floral sundresses Daphne had tried to force on me, nor the hospital scrubs I had worn for 5 years. I was wearing a tailored black suit, sharp enough to cut glass, and stilettos that clicked against the marble floor like the ticking of a bomb. Arthur Hale walked beside me, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind us were 2 junior associates from his firm, looking grim and efficient. We bypassed the receptionist. When the security guard stepped forward, Hale simply held up a court order stamped with a federal seal. The guard stepped back. We took the private elevator to the top. The ride was silent. My heart was not pounding. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. The doors opened. We walked down the corridor toward the double mahogany doors of the main conference room. I could hear Graham's voice booming from inside. I pushed the doors open. The room froze. It was a scene from a Renaissance painting of a royal court. If the court were populated by nervous bankers and sharks in Italian wool, Graham Wexford sat at the head of the table. To his right was Daphne, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. To his left was Ethan. Surrounding them were 20 other people. I recognized the representatives from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the senior loan officers from 3 major banks, and a handful of journalists from the financial press who had been invited to witness the Wexfords set the record straight. Ethan looked up. When he saw me, the color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He half rose from his chair, his mouth opening and closing. He looked at my suit. He looked at the lawyers behind me. He looked at the cold, flat expression in my eyes. He sat back down, shrinking into his collar. Graham stopped mid-sentence. His face flushed a deep, angry red. "What is the meaning of this?" Graham demanded, standing up. "Security. How did she get in here?" "Sit down, Graham," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the boardroom, it landed like a whip crack. "You do not give orders here," Graham spat. "This is a private board meeting. You are trespassing. I will have you arrested." He looked at the journalists. "You see, this is exactly the kind of instability I was talking about. She is stalking us now." Daphne let out a theatrical sob. "Ava, please. We have tried to be so patient. Just go home. We can discuss a settlement later." I walked to the empty end of the table, directly opposite Graham. Arthur Hale pulled out a chair for me. I didn't sit. I placed my hands on the polished wood and leaned forward. "I am not here for a settlement, Daphne," I said, "and I am not here as your former daughter-in-law." "Then who are you?" Graham sneered. "The aggrieved party. The jilted bride. We have already issued a statement clarifying that your outburst at the wedding was due to mental exhaustion. I am here as a proxy," I said. Arthur Hale stepped forward. He slid a single sheet of paper down the long table. It slid smoothly across the varnish and came to rest right in front of the representative from the First National Bank. "Ms. Turner is the legally appointed representative for CVT Holdings, LLC," Hale announced, his voice bored and professional. "As you know, CVT Holdings is currently the primary holder of Wexford Meridian's bonded debt. Under the covenants of the loan agreement for the riverfront project, the primary creditor has the right to attend all emergency board meetings concerning the solvency of the company. The room went deadly silent. The banker picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Graham. "It is in order, Graham," the banker said. "She has a right to be here." Graham laughed. It was a nervous, jagged sound. "CVT Holdings. That is just some shell company." "You expect me to believe this? This nurse represents a major investment firm." "Believe what you want," I said. "But if you try to remove me, Arthur will file a default notice before you can get the security guard on the radio. Do you want to explain to your shareholders why the company went into receivership because you didn't like the color of my suit?" Graham slowly sat down. His eyes were hate-filled slits. "Fine. Stay. Watch. You will see that we are in complete control. We are just explaining to our partners that the recent bad press is nothing but a domestic dispute blown out of proportion." He turned back to the room, switching on his charm. "As I was saying," Graham continued, though his voice was tighter now, "the rumors about the riverfront project are baseless. Construction is on schedule, our liquidity is strong, and the charitable foundation is fully compliant." I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a blue folder. "That is interesting," I said. "Because I have a copy of an independent audit report from your former CFO, Simon Kress." Ethan made a small, choking sound. Daphne stopped crying instantly. I opened the folder. "According to these documents," I said, reading from the page, "the Wexford Family Foundation has spent $400,000 in the last fiscal year on administrative travel. Curiously, these travel dates align perfectly with Daphne Wexford's shopping trips to Milan and the family's ski vacation in Aspen." The journalists in the corner started typing furiously on their laptops. "That is a lie," Daphne shrieked, her composure shattering. "Those were donor cultivation trips." "Cultivating donors at the Chanel boutique?" I asked. "Because here is the receipt." I slid the paper down the table. The journalists craned their necks to see. "And regarding the riverfront project," I continued, pulling out a second document, the one with the red hazard symbols, "Graham just said construction is on schedule, but this geological survey, dated 3 months ago, indicates that the soil density is insufficient to support the high-rise towers you sold to investors. It also indicates the presence of heavy metals at 300 times the legal limit." I looked at the partners from the development firm sitting halfway down the table. "If you break ground on those towers," I said to them, "they will sink, and when the EPA finds out you hid this report, you will all be facing federal indictments for environmental negligence." The room erupted into chaos. "Is this true?" one of the partners shouted, standing up. "Graham, you told us the soil samples were clean." "They are clean," Graham roared, slamming his fist on the table. "She is forging documents. She is a vindictive little girl trying to ruin me because her father is a broke truck driver." "We have the original chain of custody for the samples," Arthur Hale interjected smoothly. "And we have a sworn affidavit from the lab technician you paid to alter the results." The representative from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, a man who had been silent until now, closed his laptop. "This is a significant ethical risk," he said. His accent was clipped and final. "Our charter prevents us from investing in projects with environmental concealment. We are suspending our tranche of funding immediately pending an internal investigation." "You can't do that," Graham shouted. "We have a contract." "The contract has a fraud clause," the man said, standing up. "And I believe we just found the fraud." Panic began to spread like a virus. The bankers were on their phones. The shareholders were shouting questions. The journalists were recording everything. Ethan looked at me across the table. His eyes were wet. "Ava," he mouthed. "Why?" I looked at him. I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just a dull disappointment that I had ever wasted a heartbeat on him. "You sent the email." "Ethan," I said loud enough for the table to hear. "The one telling your mother to paint me as mentally unstable. You wanted to play the victim. Well, now you are one." Graham was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked like a cornered animal. He needed a target. He needed someone to blame. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You think you have won?" he screamed. "You think you can walk in here with your fake lawyers and your stolen papers and bring down the Wexford name? You are nothing. You are the daughter of a peasant, a man who cleans grease off his hands before he eats. You don't belong in this room. You don't understand how power works." "I think she understands it quite well," a voice said from the back of the room. It was a quiet voice, gravelly, calm, but it cut through the shouting like a razor. Every head turned. My father was standing near the door. He had come in while everyone was screaming. He was wearing his new blue blazer, but he hadn't buttoned it. He stood with his hands in his pockets, leaning against the wall with a relaxed, almost bored posture. Graham squinted at him. "Who the hell is that security? Get this old man out of here." But nobody moved. The representative from the First National Bank, the man who had validated my credentials, stood up slowly. His face had gone pale. He looked at my father with a mixture of shock and recognition. "Mr. Turner?" the banker asked. My father pushed off the wall and walked toward the table. He didn't walk like a truck driver. He walked like a man who owned the floor he was stepping on. "Hello, Robert," my father said to the banker. "How is the golf game?" "I didn't know you were involved in this," the banker stammered. "I am the trust," my father said simply. Graham looked between the banker and my father. He looked confused. "You know him. He is a truck driver. He is a nobody." "Graham," the banker said, his voice trembling slightly. "This is Roy Turner. He founded Turner Freight Systems. He sold his majority stake 5 years ago for $1.2 billion. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was heavy enough to crush bones. Graham's mouth fell open. He looked at the poor old man he had mocked. He looked at the shoes he had laughed at. He looked at the wine stain on the invisible suit from the wedding. Daphne let out a gasp that sounded like a balloon deflating. My father walked to the head of the table. He stopped next to Graham's chair. He didn't look at Graham. He looked at the room. "I spent 40 years moving goods across this country," my father said. "I learned that you can tell everything about a man by how he treats the person who delivers his package. You treated me like dirt because you thought I had no value." He turned his head slowly and looked down at Graham. "You built your life on the idea that money makes you better than other people," my father said. "So I bought your debt. I bought your loans. I bought the paper that holds your roof up. You," Graham whispered, "you are the primary creditor." "I am," Dad said. "And as of this morning, seeing as you have lost your primary investor and committed fraud, I am calling the loan. You owe me $200 million, payable immediately." "I don't have it," Graham stammered. "It is tied up in the land. You know I don't have it." "Then I guess you work for me now," Dad said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tie clip, the duplicate of the one he had given me. He placed it gently on the mahogany table. "I didn't come here to take your money, Graham," my father said softly. "I have plenty of my own." He looked at me, and his eyes were warm. Then he looked back at the terrified board of directors. "I came to collect the one thing you people cheapened," he said. "Dignity." He leaned in close to Graham, so close that Graham flinched. "Now," Dad said, "get out of my chair." The silence that followed my father's command was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and charged with the static electricity of shifting power. Graham Wexford did not move from the head of the table. He gripped the leather armrests of the chair until his knuckles turned the color of bone. He looked like a king who had just been told his castle was made of sand. "You can't do this," Graham hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You are bluffing. You are a truck driver. You don't have the authority to remove the CEO of Wexford Meridian." "I don't," my father said calmly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick document bound in blue plastic. He tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished mahogany and stopped directly in front of the representative from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. "But the debt covenants do," Dad said. Section 8, Paragraph 3. In the event of a default or a significant breach of ethical conduct, The primary creditor assumes voting rights equivalent to 51% of the board until the debt is restructured. He looked at the stunned faces around the table. I am the creditor, Dad said, and I am calling the vote. Graham looked at the board members, the men and women he had golfed with, dined with, and manipulated for years. He looked for an ally. He found none. They were staring at the documents. They were staring at the environmental report. They were staring at their own potential financial ruin. We have two choices here today, Dad announced, his voice filling the room without shouting. Option A is simple. I exercise my right to foreclose on the riverfront project. I seize the assets. I strip the company for parts to recover my $200 million. The stock goes to zero. You all lose everything. He paused, letting the threat settle like dust. Option B, Dad continued. We initiate an immediate, independent forensic audit of the entire company. We restructure the leadership, and we remove the cancer that is killing this organization. Daphne Wexford stood up. Her face was a mask of crumbling plaster. She tried to summon the imperious attitude that had terrorized waiters and shop assistants for decades. This is ridiculous, she cried, her voice cracking. You are talking about us like we are criminals. We are the Wexfords. We built this city. You cannot treat us like this because of some clerical errors. Arthur Hale stepped forward. He held up a tablet. It is not a clerical error. Mrs. Wexford, Hale said coldly. We have the bank records. You transferred $50,000 from the Orphans Relief Fund to a jeweler in Paris last Tuesday. That is wire fraud. That is 20 years in federal prison. Daphne gasped. She looked at Graham, expecting him to defend her. But Graham was staring at the table, his mind racing, calculating his own survival. It was a loan, Daphne sobbed, realizing the walls were closing in. I intended to pay it back. I am a philanthropist. You are a thief, I said, my voice cut through her hysterics. I looked at the woman who had mocked my father's shoes. I looked at the woman who had sent me an etiquette book. You stole money meant for children to buy earrings, I said, and you used my family as a shield to hide your rot. Graham slammed his hand on the table, making everyone jump. Enough, he roared. He stood up, his face purple. He pointed a shaking finger at my father. I don't care what papers you have. You are nothing. You are a peasant. You think because you got lucky with some trucking company, you can walk in here and dictate terms to me. I am Graham Wexford. I am the establishment. You will always be the help. The room went deadly quiet. It was the final nail. Graham couldn't help himself. Even with a gun to his head, he had to insult the man holding the trigger. The representative from the Sovereign Wealth Fund stood up. He smoothed his tie. He didn't look at Graham. He looked at my father. Mr. Turner, the man said, I believe option B is the only viable path forward. He turned to the rest of the board. I move for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO and CFO, he said. Effective immediately. Seconded, said the banker from First National. Seconded, said the partner from the development firm. Graham looked around the room, wild-eyed. You can't do this. I made you all rich. All in favor? The Sovereign Wealth rep asked. Every hand in the room went up. Even the people Graham thought were his friends. Even the people who had laughed at his jokes for 20 years. In the face of bankruptcy and prison, loyalty evaporated like mist. The motion carries, the rep said. He looked at Graham. Please vacate the premises. Mr. Wexford. Security will escort you out. Graham slumped back into his chair. He looked small, the arrogance drained out of him, leaving behind a terrified old man. Then, there was movement to my left. Ethan Wexford scrambled out of his chair. He didn't go to his father. He didn't go to his mother, who was weeping into her hands. He came to me. He fell to his knees, literally, physically, on the expensive carpet of the boardroom. He dropped to his knees in front of me. He grabbed the hem of my jacket. Ava, he pleaded, his eyes wide and wet with tears. Ava, please, you have to stop them. They are going to ruin us. I looked down at him. the man I had promised to love, honor, and cherish. I didn't know, Ethan babbled, desperate. I didn't know about the fraud. I didn't know about the environmental report. It was them. It was Mom and Dad. They forced me to go along with it. They made me sign things I didn't understand. He squeezed my hand, his palms sweaty. Baby, please, he said. I love you. You know I love you. We can fix this. We can use your dad's money to pay off the debts, and we can start over. Just tell him to stop. It was pathetic. It was the most repulsive thing I had ever seen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded printout of the email the one Arthur Hale had found. Get up, Ethan, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Ava, listen to me. I said get up, I snapped. He scrambled to his feet, looking hopeful. I shoved the paper into his chest. Read it, I said. He looked at the paper. He recognized it instantly. It was the email where he told his mother to paint me as mentally unstable. The email where he called himself a sympathetic victim. Ava, he stammered, his face going pale. I was under pressure. I didn't mean it. You typed it, I said. You hit send. You planned my destruction before we even cut the cake. I took a step closer to him. You didn't love me, Ethan, I said softly. You loved that I made you feel superior. You loved having a project, and the moment I became inconvenient, you were ready to throw me in the trash. I turned to the board. There will be no bailout for the family, I announced. The audit proceeds, the leadership change proceeds, and if I see one dime of the trust's money go into Ethan Wexford's personal account, I will burn this building down myself. Ethan shrank back, retreating to the wall where his parents sat in disgraced silence. My father walked over to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. You did good, kid, he whispered. I am not done, I said. I turned to the board members who were waiting for their orders. We aren't going to liquidate the company, I said. There are 2,000 employees who work for Wexford Meridian, receptionists, construction workers, janitors, people who actually work for a living. They didn't commit fraud. They shouldn't lose their livelihoods because these 3 people are greedy. I pointed at the Wexfords. So, here are the terms, I said. We keep the company running, but the culture changes today. I looked at Arthur Hale. We are establishing a whistleblower hotline, independent of the board. We are implementing a wage review for all lower-level staff, and we are setting up a transparency committee for all future projects. Agreed, the sovereign wealth rep said, nodding with respect. And one more thing, I said. I looked at my father. He nodded. He knew what was coming. Dad, I said, tell them about the Savannah grant. My father smiled. He looked at me with that deep, quiet love that had sustained me for 30 years. When Ava was 18, Dad told the room, she got into nursing school, but she didn't have the money. I had already sold my company. But I couldn't tell her. I wanted her to know she could stand on her own 2 feet. He paused. So I set up an anonymous scholarship fund at the college. Dad said, the Savannah Nursing Excellence Grant. Ava applied for it. She wrote an essay about wanting to help people who couldn't help themselves. I felt the tears prickling in my eyes. I had won that grant. It had paid for my tuition. I had spent years wondering who the donor was, thanking a ghost in my prayers. She won it on merit, Dad said, his voice thick with pride. I didn't give it to her. She earned it. I just signed the check. He looked at the Wexfords. That is the difference between us, Dad said. You give your children everything, and they become nothing. I gave my daughter nothing, and she became everything. The room was silent. Even the journalists had stopped typing. Arthur Hale placed a final document on the table in front of Graham. This is a public statement, Hale said. It admits to the false characterization of Ava Turner. It admits to the editing of the video. It offers a full, unreserved apology to Roy Turner for the disrespect shown at the wedding. And it agrees to a settlement of $5 million for defamation of character. Graham looked at the paper. He looked at the security guards waiting by the door. He picked up a pen. His hand shook so badly he could barely write. He signed it. Daphne signed it. Ethan signed it last. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the floor. A broken man who had finally realized that his name was not a currency. I picked up the signed document. I folded it and put it in my pocket. I don't want the 5 million, I said to Hale. Donate it. All of it. To where? Hale asked. To the Nursing Scholarship Fund at Savannah State, I said. Make sure it goes to students who work for a living. I looked at the Wexfords one last time. They sat huddled together at the end of the table, stripped of their power, their reputation, and their dignity. They looked like strangers. I didn't cancel the wedding because you were rich, I said to them. And I didn't cancel it because I was poor. I took my father's hand. I canceled it because respect is the only currency that matters, I said. And you are bankrupt. Let's go. Dad, I said. We turned and walked out of the boardroom. The hallway was lined with cameras. The press had gathered. Sensing blood in the water, flashbulbs popped like fireworks as we emerged from the double doors. Ms. Turner, a reporter shouted. Is it true you own the company now? Is it true you left the groom at the altar? I didn't stop. I didn't answer. I kept my head high. My father walked beside me. He was wearing his new blue blazer, but he had put his old scuffed fedora back on his head. He looked ridiculous to them. Maybe, but to me, he looked like a king. We walked through the lobby, past the security guards who nodded with newfound respect. We walked out the revolving doors into the bright, harsh sunlight of Charlotte. The air smelled of exhaust and city dust, but it felt clean. It felt free. So, Dad said as we reached the curb where his battered pickup truck was parked right next to a line of limousines. What now? I looked at the truck. I looked at the skyline of the city we had just conquered. Then I looked at my dad. I think I need a grilled cheese sandwich, I said. Dad laughed. It was a loud, happy sound that echoed off the glass towers. I know a place, he said. It is a dive. The coffee is terrible. You will love it. He opened the passenger door for me. I climbed in as we drove away, leaving the Wexfords and their crumbling empire in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had the truth in my pocket, my father by my side, and for the first time in a long time, the road ahead was wide open. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and dignity. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe your office? Let me know in the comments below so we can share this moment together. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and press the hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to hear that truth always wins. See you in the next story.